Dad texted, "We've all agreed. Stay out of the family now." I replied, "Understood." Then I pulled my investment from the new office building project. 48 hours later, my mom was in tears. My brother was hiring lawyers, and the developer texted, "Your withdrawal just killed our funding." I smiled and wrote, "Congrats, family. Your eviction notices will be drafted by Monday." I stared at my phone frozen when Dad's text lit up the screen. "We've all agreed. Stay out of the family now." No greeting, no explanation, just those 8 words. I'd been watching the funding reports for our new office tower project all afternoon. Revenue forecasts, contractor bids, zoning updates. When the message arrived like a bullet through glass. The spreadsheet in front of me blurred. A single thought pounded my skull, "Weh." I tapped, reply, without thinking. 2 words, cold as steel, understood. Then I closed the message thread, took a deep breath, and opened my trading platform. The sum I'd wired in 3 months ago. $1.2 million. Sat as liquid capital on my dashboard. My finger hovered over, withdraw. For years I'd dreamed of honoring Grandma's vision of rebuilding our hometown. Of turning that dusty corner lot into a gleaming symbol of our family's commitment. But somewhere between Dad's ego and Peter's reckless optimism, that dream had curdled into hubris. The transfer confirmation pinged in seconds. "Your withdrawal request has been processed." No turning back. I shut my laptop, leaned back in my chair, and let my mind drift to the bigger picture. By 2030, corporate governance in family enterprises would face a reckoning. Automatic audits, transparent ledgers, AI and accountability. Our little blow-up would soon be a cautionary tale in business schools, a footnote in the history of how nepotism finally collided with ethics. 48 hours later, the world around me collapsed. My phone erupted at dawn, 50 missed calls from Peter, frantic voicemails begging me to reverse the transfer. 2. Just give them a chance. My mother texted a photo of herself, mascara smudged, clutching a tissue. No messages from Dad. He never communicated when I mattered most. Then the developer's message. "Your withdrawal just killed our funding. We're toast." I scrolled past it, thumb brushing the screen like it might burn me. I walked downtown for coffee, trying to process the fallout. The bank had already been served notice of a lawsuit for breach of contract. The project site, once bustling with hard hats and drilling rigs, was silent, half, fenced with yellow tape. Local news outlets smelled blood, a family feud, a stalled skyscraper, small-town drama under neon lights. I passed by the empty lot and felt a hollow satisfaction. They had 1 week to secure new capital or start handing out eviction notices to their own investors and contractors. I met my college friend Jordan for lunch, now a venture capitalist in San Francisco, and explained the situation in clipped sentences: Dad's text, my withdrawal, the lawsuit. He raised an eyebrow and pointed out how much leverage I'd just wrested back into my hands. He said, "Well, you didn't just save yourself. You just rewrote the rules for every inherited fortune in this town." He was right. By late afternoon, Peter had hired lawyers and threatened a countersuit. My mom called again, begging me to reconsider for the sake of family legacy. I listened without replying, then drove home silently. In my apartment, I sat at my desk, opened a blank email draft, and composed my final message: "Congrats, family. Your eviction notices will be drafted by Monday." I paused. Those words felt like closing a chapter that started generations ago. Tomorrow I'd have to face my mother's tears in person, Peter's fury in the boardroom, and Dad's silence at the dinner table. But for the first time, I felt in control of my own narrative. I hit send and watched the email disappear into cyberspace like a spark igniting a fuse. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake imagining the headlines: family dynasty implodes over tower funding scandal. I thought about history students decades from now dissecting our downfall. Then I drifted into a rare sense of calm. Some stories demanded a shocking start, and this was mine. Tomorrow, the next act would begin. The next morning, my phone lit up at 6 a.m. with a single line. "We need to talk before you do more damage." It was from Dad's work address, not his personal line, so I knew it wasn't a casual request. I stared at the screen for a long minute, the words echoing in my head like a judge's gavel. Instead of replying, I grabbed my jacket and headed out. I found them waiting in the old conference room at the family office, the one with the dusty mahogany table, and portraits of my grandparents on the walls. Peter sat at the head, flanked by 2 corporate attorneys in crisp suits. Mom hovered by the door, clutching her purse like it was a lifeline. Dad didn't look up as I entered. He never did when he was angry. I took the empty chair opposite Peter. Silence settled like fog, thick and uncomfortable. Then Dad cleared his throat and spoke without emotion. He said my withdrawal violated our shareholder agreement, jeopardized the entire project, and forced the company into breach. Peter's lawyer produced a stack of documents and slid them toward me. Letters of intent, funding guarantees, penalty clauses. I listened without interrupting, tapping the table lightly. They warned of lawsuits, personal liability, financial ruin. But when they asked me to reverse the transfer, to put family first, I shook my head. I reminded them I'd raised concerns about undisclosed cost overruns and phantom contractors 6 weeks ago, only to be brushed aside. I reminded them Grandma's vision was never supposed to rest on shortcuts and inflated invoices. My voice stayed calm, but I could feel my pulse thudding in my temples. Mom's eyes filled with tears. She said she understood my principles but pleaded that everything I cared about, our name, our reputation, was on the line. She didn't say, "Son," but I felt her reaching out. I wanted to reach back. But the lawyers nudged her aside, and Peter glared at me as if I'd personally vandalized his future office space. We paused for an early lunch, sandwiches from across the hall, so the attorneys could strategize. In the break room, I overheard them talking about seizing my personal assets if I refused to comply. They had already drafted a motion for injunction. I realized this wouldn't end in polite negotiations. At 30, I was about to pick a fight with the two people who raised me. Back in the conference room, they laid out their terms: repayment of my entire investment plus interest, a public apology, and a decision to reverse course on every change I'd demanded. In return, they dropped the lawsuit. Peter even promised to step down as project lead if I would come back in good faith. He said he wanted to protect one thing above all: the family's unity. I looked at him. The brother who'd once taught me to ride a bike, then later taught me how to hedge in derivatives. I remembered summers in the pool, chasing each other with water guns. I remembered midnight talks about life and marriage. And I felt the weight of everything we'd lost. I stood and walked to the window, staring at the vacant lot where steel beams had been delivered the week before. The site looked abandoned, wounded. I thought about Grandma's name etched into the cornerstone plaque. I thought about the textbooks that would cite our collapse as a lesson in governance and greed. Then I turned back, straightened my jacket, and told them I'd consider their offer. But only if they agreed to an independent audit by Monday, and a third-party trustee to oversee future disbursements. I told them our trust was broken, and the only way to rebuild it was to strip away the secrecy that had let them inflate costs unchecked. Dad's jaw clenched. Peter's face reddened. The attorneys whispered urgently. Mom stared at me, torn between relief and sorrow. Finally, Dad nodded once, curtly, as if offended but resigned to negotiate. They agreed to the audit clause. They refused the trustee, proposing instead to let Peter pick an internal audit committee. I refused. We compromised on a cost-capping mechanism, with penalties if overruns exceeded 5%. I won a small victory, but it felt hollow. We adjourned until Monday to finalize the terms. Afterward, I walked out into the late afternoon sun, the city's hum muted by the tension inside me. I realized my family's fight was now a public spectacle. Everyone from contractors to reporters would be watching. I didn't know how this war would end, only that I'd drawn a line I couldn't cross again. As I crossed the courtyard, I dropped my gaze to the cracked pavement and whispered to myself, history doesn't forgive indecision. Then I headed home, steeling myself for Monday's reckoning. Monday arrived with an early knock on my door. The auditor from Ridge & Cole, a stern woman in a gray suit, stood there at 7:45 a.m. She carried 3 briefcases. I invited her in, offered coffee, she shook her head, and settled at my kitchen table. Over the next hour, she unfurled documents: bank statements, contractor agreements, correspondence logs. I watched her eyes narrow at line items I'd flagged: a $250K site prep contingency that had no backup invoices, a series of consulting fees paid to an unregistered shell company. She tapped her pen, made notes. I stayed silent, listening to her chain of observations. Each anomaly I'd spotted was now laid out in black and white: missing receipts, unexplained markups, duplicate vendor payments. She summarized. If these discrepancies hold, your concerns are valid. Then she closed her red leather briefcase and said, let's visit the site. By 10 a.m. we were at the half-finished lot. The chain link fence was rattling in the wind, and the concrete foundation had already begun to crack in places. The project manager, a lanky fellow named Harris, met us with a clipboard. He looked nervous at the sight of the auditor. Ridge & Cole's presence made every worker stop and stare. I realized that, by demanding this audit, I'd turned the site into a crime scene. Inside the trailer office, she grilled Harris on purchase orders and subcontracts. He shuffled papers, stammered excuses. I saw him push a folder under the desk, then slide it back. She asked to see it. He hesitated, then handed it over. It was the shell company invoices I'd pointed out. She frowned, scribbled a note: possible fraud. Recommend immediate halt pending forensic accounting. Harris's face went pale. I felt a flicker of something: remorse, anger, fear. He shot me a look that said, thanks a lot. I ignored him. I'd known this day would come if they refused transparency. Grandma's dream mattered more to me than short-term reputations. Back in the conference room that afternoon, I presented Ridge & Cole's preliminary findings to Dad, Peter, and the attorneys. I laid out every charge: phantom consultants, inflated material costs, forged timesheets. Dad shifted in his chair. Peter's jaw tightened until I thought I'd hear cartilage crack. The lawyers whispered to each other like conspirators at a spy meeting. Dad finally spoke. If these findings are accurate, the project has been mismanaged. But we can't just shut it down. Jobs, reputation, local economy. He paused. We'll need to notify the board and renegotiate with lenders. This will be messy, but salvageable. Peter shot me a look of betrayal. You've just dumped 30% of our capital into audits and legal fees. You've tanked investor confidence. You'll cost us millions more if you keep this up. I stared back. I cost you your convenience. I cost you your shortcuts. Now we have a chance to rebuild properly. Mom sat off to the side, tears brimming. Please, she said, voice small. Stop fighting. I just want our family back. I swallowed. I wanted that too. But letting them cover up fraud for the sake of unity wasn't an option. I won't apologize for doing the right thing, I said. By Wednesday, the story hit the press. A local reporter wrote an exposé. Scandal rocks hometown tower. Family audit reveals millions in phantom expenses. It spread to regional outlets. Comments poured in, some called me a hero, others branded me a traitor to my blood. I paid it little mind. Instead, I focused on the next steps. Ridge and Cole would complete a full forensic audit within 2 weeks. The board agreed to suspend Peter as project lead and appoint an interim committee, including 2 independent members. Dad, visibly exhausted, requested a one-on-one meeting that evening. In his study, he closed the door, gestured to a leather chair. He began quietly. Son, I lost sight of what mattered. I got swept up in ambition. His voice cracked once, then steadied. Your grandmother would be proud of you. For protecting her legacy. I'm sorry I let ego blind me. I nodded, felt a lump in my throat. Let's make this right, I said. He reached across the desk and clasped my hand. We'll fix it together. As I walked home under the streetlights, I realized history was repeating itself on a human scale. The power corrupted by secrecy, reclaimed by courage. The headlines tomorrow would talk about audits and resignations, but the real story was about integrity. How one person's insistence on truth can cascade through an entire dynasty. That night, I opened my laptop and drafted a brief note to the town council. An offer to hold a public forum on corporate governance and community impact. I envisioned a future where family enterprises like ours would operate under new standards. Transparency, accountability, ethical oversight. It was ambitious, it was necessary. Tomorrow I'd sit before the board again, armed with fresh data and a clearer vision. The path ahead was fraught. Lawsuits still loomed, lenders were jittery, and Peter's wrath hadn't fully subsided. But with each step, I felt our family's legacy inch back toward what Grandma intended. And in the longer sweep of history, I knew that missteps like ours would become case studies in ethics classes. Another footnote showing how the right decisions, even the hardest ones, could reshape the narrative. For now, though, I would sleep peacefully, knowing I'd lit a match that no amount of darkness could snuff out. Part 5. I woke Thursday morning with a knot in my stomach. Today was the town council meeting. The moment I'd been preparing for, the crossroads of every decision I'd made. I dressed in a dark suit and white shirt, the same outfit Dad always wore on important days. Under my arm I carried 2 printed speeches, one framed around redemption and toward trust, the other a full exposé of every suppressed email, every hushed warning, every conscious decision to let fraud continue. On the drive-in, I replayed my brother's words. Was it worth it? I remembered the hope in the professor's eyes when she voted to reinstate funding, the relief in the developer's nod when we delivered the lender's letter. But I also remembered Harris's envelope and those emails proving Dad and Peter knew more than they admitted. If I spoke that truth, the fallout would be nuclear. Lawsuits, regulators, reputations destroyed. It would be final, irrevocable. I parked near City Hall and walked past the line of local business owners and reporters already gathering. Word had leaked that I'd withdrawn my investment and triggered an audit. Now everyone wanted to see what came next. I showed my press badge to the door guard, stepped into the cool lobby, and headed to the council chamber. The walls were paneled in dark wood, and the public seating was already half full when I arrived. Behind the dais, council members and the mayor exchanged subdued greetings. At the front row of the audience, I spotted Harris, looking smaller than I remembered him on sight, and 2 Ridge and Cole auditors taking notes. My brother sat beside our mother, his shoulders tense, her eyes red, rimmed but watchful. Dad was nowhere to be seen. I took a seat in the witness chair, my folder, and waited. The clerk called my name, and I rose to speak. The chamber fell silent. I cleared my throat. Thank you for this opportunity. I glanced at the council, then at the rows behind them. 2 weeks ago, I asked for an independent audit of our family's tower project. Many feared it would destroy jobs and investment. Instead, it revealed mismanagement and fraud at the highest levels. I paused, heart pounding, and set aside the redemption speech. Councilman Rivera raised an eyebrow. The mayor leaned forward. I took a breath and continued. Today, I'm here not just to report on our corrective measures. Though we have renegotiated contracts, capped costs, and reinstated funding under a new governance charter. I'm here to share evidence that our board knowingly ignored red flags, emails I've brought as exhibits, showing clear warnings about shell, company invoices, potential embezzlement, and the decision to bury them for the sake of expedience. I watched Peter's face blanch, saw our mother slump forward, covering her mouth. I laid the printed emails on the lectern, handed copies to the clerk, and met the council's eyes. I urge this body to refer these findings to the State Ethics Commission, and to consider criminal referral for those responsible. Our town deserves full transparency, not just lip service. A murmur rose in the audience. Reporters clicked cameras. Councilman Rivera cleared his throat. Mr. Carlson, you understand this will ignite legal actions from your family's company. I nodded. Are you prepared for the consequences? I nodded again. Yes, sir. I am. The mayor called for order and opened the floor to discussion. The debate was fierce. Some council members thanked me for courage, others chastised me for betrayal. A labor union representative praised the exposure of fraud, arguing that worker wages had been jeopardized. A small business owner warned that investors would flee our town. From the edge of the dais, I saw Dad slip in silent, eyes fixed on me. After 2 hours, the council voted 5-2 to refer the case to the Ethics Commission, and to mandate public quarterly audits for all future development projects over a high $ million. They also approved a grant to help displaced contractors cover wage gaps during the audit period. I exhaled, feeling a weight lift even as the room buzzed. Outside, reporters swarmed me with questions. Will you press charges? Is your family ruined? I answered calmly that my goal was accountability, not vengeance, and that I hoped our experience would catalyze stronger regulation statewide. Later, in the empty chamber, I found my brother and mother waiting. Peter's voice was quiet. You did what you had to. Mom reached for my hand, tears in her eye. I'm proud, even if it hurts. My father stood in the doorway, head bowed. He stepped forward and embraced me. You saved us from ourselves. I didn't respond immediately. I thought of history, the way small revolutions spark wider change, how one person's act can ripple into law and culture. I realized this wasn't just our family's reckoning. It was the start of a new chapter for community governance everywhere. As I left City Hall, the late afternoon sun illuminated the new project site across the street. Workers had returned, surveying the foundation, ready to rebuild on honest ground. I smiled, remembering Grandma's dream of transformation. Not just in steel and glass, but in integrity and trust. Tomorrow, I'd face negotiations on legal terms and restitution. But today, I'd witness something rarer than any tower rising from concrete, the moment truth reclaimed its place at the center of power. And in that moment, I knew history was on my side.